everyone, coming at you for night 3 of our digital Woman in Craft Beer Festival, Beers Without Beards, empowered by Bumble. I'm Grace Whites, head of partnerships for Hop Culture and creator of BWOB. I'm so excited because tonight we're combining probably 2 of my favorite things, beer and food, and specifically cheese. For those of you that know me, I'm a huge cheese lover, and this virtual cooking class features a mac and beer cheese recipe with tons and tons of cheese, so I'm super excited. For tonight's class, we teamed up with New Belgium, one of the OG woman-owned breweries in the country, and the Queer Food Foundation, an amazing, amazing organization that promotes, protects, funds, and creates queer food spaces to celebrate and honor queer food workers and chefs. Gabrielle Lenart, who actually started the Queer Food Foundation, is a fellow NYU Food Studies alum. So those of you that don't know, we're all here tonight because I actually started Beers Without Beards as my graduate school thesis project when I was in the NYU Master's Food Studies program. So Gabrielle and I knew that this was a perfect match made in heaven to create an event during Beers Without Beards. And then finally, our most important guest tonight, you guys are all looking at on the screen there, Chef Chala, who will be taking you through all the steps to making their mac and beer cheese recipe featuring New Belgium's Voodoo IPA. Love it. I just want to give you guys a quick background on Chef Chala before I jump out here and let you get to cooking. They are a chef, writer, and community organizer based in Brooklyn, New York. Fueled by a passion for food justice, culture, and history, Chef Chala's work strives to illuminate the ways in which food shapes and influences the world at the individual, institutional, and systemic levels of society. So I can't thank them enough for joining us tonight to showcase and honor these queer food spaces that we're really hoping to cultivate, not only in food, but also in beer as well. So my mouth is already salivating. I know you all want to get to cooking, or maybe you're just drinking along and watching Chef Chala cook. That's totally fine too. Either way, let's get to it. If you guys have questions while we're going through the recipe, feel free to post them in the comments. We're going to try to leave some time at the end to hopefully answer any of those questions if you're stuck on a certain step as you're going through everything. But other than that, let's take it away. Chef Chala, over to you, and let's get cooking on this mac and beer cheese recipe.
Thanks, Grace, for that intro, and thanks again to Hop Culture, to Beers Without Beards, to Voodoo Ranger, and to everyone involved in making this possible, especially Queer Food Foundation. So again, I'm Chef Chala. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs, and I am here this evening to guide you through a lovely mac and beer cheese recipe. So when tasked with coming up with a recipe that involved the lovely Voodoo Ranger IPA, beer cheese was kind of the first thing that my mind jumped to. I used to be a cheesemonger, so anytime I get to use several kinds of cheese in one recipe, it's always a win. And this recipe is really great because the bright, fruity notes of the Voodoo Ranger really stand out without making it something that's too boozy or too heavy. So we're going to go ahead and get into our ingredient situation here. First and most important, 8 ounces of pasta. You can use elbow macaroni. I like to get cavatappi. It has this really nice, cool spirally shape to it, and it always reminds me of getting a fancy pasta at Macaroni Grill or something. So that's my go-to for mac and cheese. We have sharp white cheddar as well as sharp yellow cheddar. We have a cup of each. We also have a cup of Parmesan cheese. I grated all of my cheese fresh. I think it's really important to grate all of your cheese fresh because bagged shredded cheese will have a lot of anti-caking agents and added things to keep it from getting clumpy. But when you grate it fresh, you get a much stronger, cheesier flavor. So that is my recommendation. I've got a cup of whole milk here that in the recipe I noted it's important to keep the milk at room temperature, and you will find out why soon. We have a 1/4 cup of butter. We have 4 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, 2/3 a cup of our lovely Voodoo Ranger IPA, also kept at room temperature. We also have 4 ounces of sliced baby bella mushrooms. We've got 4 ounces of slab bacon or pancetta. You could also use just regular store-bought sliced bacon, But I like slab bacon because the thicker pieces don't really like crumble under the weight of the mac and cheese. So I like to have big pieces. We've got 2 tablespoons of fresh chopped thyme leaves, and then some salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika. So if you've got all your ingredients ready and set, you've got the rest of your Voodoo Ranger to sip on while we're cooking. Then we're gonna head on over to the stove and get this working. So I already had my pasta water boiling in anticipation. I gave it a very generous amount of salt. I used to just kind of put a sprinkle of salt in my pasta water, and then I watched Simeon Nosrat's Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, and she opened my eyes. So now it's a hefty palmful of salt into the pot. So we're gonna go ahead and just shake all of our pasta into the pot, get that boiling, let it go. Hopefully we all know how to boil pasta. I'm also going to take my large skillet. I'm going to set it to about a medium high and let that get warm. So the first thing we're going to be doing is taking our bacon and getting it nice and crispy in the pan. Make sure you grab something to keep it moving with. You don't want it to get stuck. I'm just going to go ahead and pop that in there. I could have waited for the pan to get a little warmer, but I'm feeling impatient. I'm going to grab my Voodoo Ranger while we wait for this to start sizzling. Oh, the sizzle of bacon is absolutely one of my favorite cooking sounds. It's like bacon sizzle. It's like a good crunch when you bite into a good loaf of like fresh sourdough. That's also up there. Of course, the opening of a beer can. It's a great sound. You can't go wrong. But bacon sizzle is top-notch food sound in my book. So you're gonna want to keep it moving just so that it doesn't get burnt, but it doesn't need too much attention. You want to also make sure that while your pasta's boiling, you give it the occasional stir so it gets stuck. I was raised in a household where I was led to believe that like putting a little bit of oil into the pasta pot while you're boiling helps it from sticking. And then I got older and realized oil and water don't mix, and it's very futile. The way to keep it from sticking is to just keep stirring. So give it a periodic stir. Let your bacon get all nice and sizzly. Enjoy the bacon sounds and smells. I think it was Rachel Ray who always said smell-o-vision. She wishes there was smell-o-vision so you could smell what she was cooking. Watched a lot of Rachel as a kid. I'm afraid I'm giving it too much attention. So I'm going to let it sizzle for a little bit. This is kind of the slower part. Cooking is usually a little bit of waiting. And I know that's not always exciting in a cooking class, especially a virtual one. But hopefully we're having a good engage going. Hopefully you've got a Voodoo IPA and you're enjoying the process. So what we're looking for in the bacon is, one, we want a lot of the fat to start rendering off, so that we have a nice fat base to work with when we put the mushrooms in. But also you want it to go ahead and start getting a little crispy. Maybe it pops at you. Show no fear. Bacon can smell fear. Yeah, starting to get some nice crispy bits in there. Give that another minute or so. Give my pasta another stir. I know a watch pot doesn't boil, but we're all watching it tonight, so we'll see how that goes. All right. And now that we're at a point where we've started to get some nice rendering of the fat, you see it pull in there. We're starting to see some nice crispy edges on our bacon. I'm going to give it another second. I'm going to let it get even crispier. If you don't like your bacon super crispy, if you like a bit more of a chew to it, you can go ahead and toss your mushrooms in. If you want it crispier, you can give it another minute. Cooking is very personal. It's mostly emotion. This bacon is popping at me, but I'm showing it no fear. All right. So it's a symphony. So now I'm going to go ahead and shimmy all of our mushrooms in there. I just got popped by the bacon, but you know what? That's part of the job. And we're going to try to get these mushrooms well coated in the bacon fat just so that they cook nicely. If you have a fattier bacon and you find yourself with excess bacon grease at the pan that you don't necessarily want in your mac and cheese, you can try to drain that into something. You can grab a slotted spoon and drain it out. But definitely make sure there's enough in there so that your mushrooms don't stick. And once you've gotten them all kind of coated in the bacon fat there, you can go ahead and sprinkle your thyme in. You're going to want to do the thyme fairly soon after adding the mushrooms, just so that the kind of aromas really get a chance to mix and mingle. Thyme is one of those herbs that doesn't really change the flavor of a dish so much as it changes the aromatic nature and it changes the smell, which is an important aspect of flavor. And I added it to this recipe just because with the brightness of the Voodoo Ranger IPA, I wanted something, in addition to the bacon and the mushrooms, that was going to give it a really nice, like, earthy aroma and earthy grounding to it. So, got some thyme in there. This is starting to look beautiful. Let that simmer. You want to get the mushrooms pretty cooked. Just because you want to get them pretty cooked. You want to have them nice and brown. Give that pasta another stir. We're getting somewhere. It's a slow journey, but we're getting somewhere. Let's just continue to sizzle. Move things around. Could be fancy and do that like chef saute. Yeah. This makes things interesting. We're going to give these just about 30 more seconds to get a little bit more color onto some of these mushrooms. So have a big mixing bowl ready. This is the bowl that everything, including the pasta, is eventually going to end up with. So I'm just going to plop my mixture right in here. Not going to dirty any extra dishes. I do have a dishwasher, but we'll give her a rest. We'll give her a break. All right. So I'm taking this off the heat, giving it one last razzle dazzle. And I'm going to go ahead and just let this all rest right in my bowl. I'm going to run some cold water in there. So, as our pasta is continuing to work, I think we're going to go ahead and get started on the most crucial element, the beer cheese. So you're gonna want to start this off at like a medium low, just because you don't want the butter to burn, you don't want the pan to be too hot so that the cheese scorches and sticks. You want to have it at a nice, even, medium low so that everything has time to do what it wants to do. I always get really impatient when it comes to pasta. I know it takes time, but I want it now. So I'm going to test it. It's probably not ready, but I'm going to do it anyway. She's close. For mac and cheese, I like my pasta to be a little bit more on the al dente side. I like a little bite to it. You can boil your pasta for a little bit longer if you want to, but I find that al dente is best, especially just when you're mixing everything. You don't want your noodles falling apart. You don't want them too soft under the weight of the cheese sauce. You want everything to be in a nice, happy marriage. So our pan is feeling hot, and we're gonna plop that butter right on in there. Make sure you keep your butter moving. Oh, love a sizzle. Love a sizzle. You can use any butter that you want. I used salted butter, just because it's what I like. I also used Kerrygold butter because I live and die by Kerrygold Irish butter. I'm gonna stop playing with that. So going to let that move around a bit. My noodles should be ready at this point. So you're gonna grab a colander and hopefully some towels or pot holders. Strain your pasta, point it away from your face so you're not getting any backsplash. All right. Feel like you're in a spa getting a steam facial. Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Our butter's melting here. Gonna keep that moving. And once you're about at full melt, you want to go ahead and start getting started adding your flour, because you don't want the butter to start to brown. We're not making a brown butter sauce, we're making beer cheese. In the written recipe, I wrote to whisk the cheese in. However, you can whisk it in the literal sense of using a whisk. I don't like using a metal whisk on my nonstick pan, so I'm going to whisk in the sense of stirring very vigorously with a silicone spatula. I also like using a spatula because it helps me get all of the corners of the saucepan. So I'm going to sprinkle a tiny bit in at a time. It's going to foam up like this. That is perfectly natural. That is what it wants to do. This process is known as making a roux, which is mixing in a fat and a flour. And you're just going to keep sprinkling and keep it moving. If at the end of this you find that your beer cheese is a little thinner than you would like it, you can always, if you decide to make it again, which I hope you will, you can always add more flour in to thicken it up, but not after the fact. You have to do it while you're making it. I messed with the flour ratio a few times when testing this out and found that 4 tablespoons was a-okay with me. So we're whisking the flour in, getting our roux going, keeping it all moving. And once you've got everything in and you've made sure you have no little lumpy pockets of flour, you are going to grab your milk. And now this is why I said to keep the milk and the beer at room temperature. If you pour cold, fridge fresh milk into this, it's going to want to start to curdle. And that makes it kind of harder to work a lot of the lumps out. So when you've kept it at room temperature, it still kind of wants to curdle, but it'll do a lot less of that. If you find it's curdling a little too much for your taste, you can reduce the heat a little bit. And you're gonna keep everything moving. I like to do everything in batches and not dump everything in at once, just to make sure I'm getting the desired effect. Because it's easier to do it a little bit at a time and work out what you need to work out than do everything at a time and completely ruin. If it's curdling a bit like this, that is okay. That's what it wants to do. But once you add more liquid, it should start smoothing itself out. All right. Once you're at this point, this is when you're going to add in your Voodoo Ranger IPA, a little bit at a time. Gonna keep whisking. It's gonna look a little weird for a second. You gotta let yourself work through it. Once you start pouring the beer in, you're gonna get those lovely, bright, citrusy floral notes. And I see that sauce start to thin out. Oh, yeah. Hopefully what you're working with looks similar to this. If not, just keep stirring. If it looks a little curdled or too thick, feel free to add a touch more milk to really get it to this nice liquidy stage. And this is when we start adding in our cheese. I'm going to start with the Parmesan just because that's the mood I'm in. Again, with the cheese, you're going to want to do it a little bit at a time because you don't want to bring the temperature of this mixture too far down with colder cheese. And you want to make sure everything has a chance to get fully melted and mixed in there. So once you see everything's melted, you're going to go ahead and add a little more. Make sure you keep it working. See, I like to use the spatula because I got all these bits and bobs on the side of my saucepan. And you might see a little lump. You're just gonna keep whisking, keep stirring, try to work out any lumps you might see. Hopefully they're just cheese lumps and they'll melt. Get that all in there. Keep it working. All right, then I'm gonna go ahead and grab my yellow cheddar. Do about half of it at once. Keep it moving. Growing up, my older sister used to make mac and cheese pretty often for the family. Everyone had their specialty, and one of my sisters, hers was mac and cheese. She never put beer in it because we were children, but I hope that this mac and cheese recipe would do her proud. So, Irma, if you're out there, this one's for you. Keep it moving, keep it stirring. Hopefully you're working in something non-stick, but if your temperature is on a nice medium low and you're getting the stirring going, nothing should be sticking. I decided to use 2 different kinds of cheese, of cheddar, not because there's really much of a flavor difference, which I learned that the main difference between yellow cheddar and white cheddar is a use of either food dye or annatto seeds. But I like to get this nice like light orange color in here. Could have been more orange, but the light orange feels a little elevated to me. So you're going to keep this moving. If you feel like it's bubbling too much, if you feel like it's burning at the bottom, feel free to reduce your heat. If you feel like your cheese isn't melting fast enough for you, feel free to turn your heat up, but you'll want to keep it just below medium. You're going to see how your cheese sauce is starting to get nice and thick. Velveeta's got nothing on this. Not a thing. We're going to take our white cheddar, sprinkle some of that in here. Give that the same luxury treatment. Before developing this recipe, I had never actually ventured to make mac and cheese from scratch myself, and I have to say, it's not that hard when you put your mind to it. And hopefully everyone following along at home can also attest to that. But if you find it difficult and I'm lying, feel free to call me out. I can take it. The last of our white cheddar here. Every last cheesy drop. Gonna go ahead and stir in. And as we're stirring this in, gonna just add all of our spices, paprika, garlic powder, pepper, salt. I put some pretty standard measurements on the recipe, but if you don't like paprika and you want a little bit more garlic powder, do it. If you want it a little bit more peppery and you want to add, more black pepper, do it. Recipes are merely guidelines. They should not dictate your entire cooking experience. But they should still be followed, or else you might end up with burnt cheese. Nobody wants that. All right. Hopefully your cheese sauce is looking nice and rich. Hopefully it's not burning like mine might want to do right now. So I'm going to turn my heat down to low, just to make sure that everything is nice and mixed in, make sure that all of my cheese is melted. I really want to just kind of like drink it right out the pot, but I know it's very hot, so I'm going to use a little impulse control and avoid doing that. All right. Hopefully you can get a nice melt on all that cheese. And technically, if you just wanted to have a beer cheese dip and like grab some soft pretzels and dunk them in this, you could. It's a lovely beer cheese. It's Oktoberfest. No one would be mad at you. But we're here to make macaroni and beer cheese. So we're going to get back to our pasta. This has been sitting in the sink draining. We're going to pop it right into the big bowl with our bacon and mushrooms. Hopefully you saw what I did and you took your cheese sauce off of the heat. I forgot to say it out loud, but I'm saying it now. You'll go ahead and give this like a light mix just to make sure you got everything nice and friendly. And then you're gonna go ahead and grab that saucepan. I'm gonna get that beer cheese and hopefully it just drizzles on into the bowl. Oh, it's beautiful. Velveeta could never. Velveeta who? So you're gonna get all that into the bowl. Another reason I like using a rubber spatula, no cheese left behind. No cheese left behind. Not at all. Not in this household, at least. Oh yeah. We're gonna get all of that in there. I'm gonna put that away and we're gonna move back over to my table as we mix. You're gonna wanna see that lovely mac and cheese pull that we all love to see. Macaroni in a pot, as Cardi B said. You're gonna get everything nice and married in your bowl, and hopefully you've got something that looks a little bit like this. And that is pretty much all there is to it. I'm gonna serve up a little bit, show you some garnishing tips that I like to do when plating, when serving. Do 2 nice big scoops. This serves about 4 people if you're not super hungry, 3 people if you're like voracious. Gonna sprinkle a little fresh grated Parmesan over top there. Give it a little parsley. You gotta love parsley. I always keep parsley on hand. There's not a problem in my life that parsley couldn't fix. That's a lie, but it sounded nice in my head. And there you have it. That is macaroni and beer cheese featuring the lovely Voodoo Ranger IPA. And I'm gonna grab a fork. This smells delicious. So hopefully you have a nice plate of mac and cheese to enjoy. Hopefully you've got a Voodoo Ranger by your side. And we've got some time for a Q&A. So if you have any questions about this recipe, about Queer Food Foundation, about my work as a chef, about how my day is going, I'm free to check in too. Feel free to drop all your questions in the comments. And hopefully this was easy enough for everyone to follow along. So we can get Grace back in here for a little Q&A moderation.
Oh, Chef Chala, I love it. I'm absolutely salivating. That cheese sauce is just giving me life. Sometimes what I find with mac and cheese is that there's not enough cheese in the recipe. And people make a sauce that's either too thin or too watery or doesn't really cling to the noodle. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons that you use the spirally pasta as well to really cling to that. Oh, amazing.
Perfect shape.
Yeah, perfect shape. So we definitely have a few questions that popped up throughout the class. So I'd love to get to those first. And then I would love to talk with you a little bit more about Queer Food Foundation and some of the work that you're continuing to do in the queer food space. So this is one that I saw pop up here. And this is a question for all the vegetarians out there. So do you have a suggestion for a substitute for the bacon for vegetarians who were making this recipe?
A substitute for the bacon, yeah. I personally would just add more mushrooms. I love to use mushrooms as a bacon substitute in a lot of things. I also know that a friend of mine who is tuned in is using vegan bacon. I am not entirely sure what brand of vegan bacon, but that is also something that you could use to substitute in. But yeah, for that kind of like deep earthy flavor that the bacon really serves here, more mushrooms and I would say smoked paprika instead of regular paprika will give you that nice like cured bacon taste.
Ah, that's a great tip because bacon does have that really smoky quality about it. So I think using that smoked paprika will be a great substitute to kind of complement with whether you're using more mushrooms or vegan bacon.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Another question about the recipe we have here from Paul. He's wondering if there's a way that you could potentially finish the recipe and maybe broil it for a little bit more crisp on top. Have you done that with this recipe in the past, or have you experimented at all?
Absolutely. So the first time I was experimenting with this recipe, I did bake it, and that's definitely something you could do. I would sprinkle a bit more Parmesan, even more cheddar on top, pop it into the oven on broil if you just want it to kind of get crispy on top, or for about 20-25 minutes on 400 degrees. Everything's already cooked, so it doesn't take super long, but I decided not to do it for this recipe just because I didn't know how it would fit into the time constraints of a cooking class, and I didn't want everyone to just like watch me stand around while I waited for it to bake. But you absolutely can bake it. It is delicious baked. That is an excellent question.
Nice. And then we just had a little bit of a reminder question here. How much beer did you end up using in the recipe? And then just so everyone knows, the recipe is posted on the site, hopculture.com/BWOB20 under the virtual cooking class event. We have the recipe and all the ingredients posted there. So even if you miss something during tonight, you can always go back and refer to that. But if you could just, Chef Chala, give us a quick reminder, how much beer did you use?
I used 2/3 of a cup of beer. I experimented using more, and it felt a little too boozy. I used a full cup the first time I made it. I was like, why not? Who doesn't want more beer flavor? Sounds great. And like one, it made it thinner, so the cheese was kind of running off the noodles, like you were saying, which is like not what I was looking for. And two, it did make the dish a little too boozy. And really kind of drowned out all of the other like cheese flavors that were in the dish. So 2/3 of a cup is your best bet.
Yeah, and then you can drink the rest. So it's
not even the full can. You can drink the rest. It's the best of
as you were doing, drinking while you're cooking. But that's a really good point that you make, that you wanted to make sure that the rest, the cheese kind of featured prominently, and the Voodoo Ranger was just kind of in the background there. But I'm curious to know what you thought, and this is just a question coming from me, but what did you think, or what notes did you find in the Voodoo Ranger that were really highlighted in this dish, or why did you choose a mac and beer cheese recipe specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, when I used to work as a cheesemonger, we would make beer cheese all of the time, and it was usually IPAs, but there were usually kind of more hoppy, more earthy IPAs, and I really love that the Voodoo Ranger has these very bright citrus and floral notes to it that help make the mac and cheese feel, because sometimes if I eat too much mac and cheese, I'm like, maybe shouldn't have done all of that. You can feel really heavy, and the bright notes in this really open up and complement the kind of like saltiness of the Parmesan and sharpness of the cheddar. And to talk about my hero and idol, Samin Nosrat, once more, kind of it helps bring that balance of acidity to a dish that is already very fatty and very salty. So Voodoo Ranger was like excellent to do a beer mac and cheese with, and beer cheese definitely felt very in the spirit of a beer festival, an Oktoberfest, and something that people kind of recognize but don't necessarily always know what to do with other than use it as a dip. So I was like, yeah, let's throw some noodles in there and see what happens. And I'm really glad with how it all turned out, and I hope everyone at home is too.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you were saying that the IPA kind of really complements more of the fatty and salty notes that went into this dish. Kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have, I think this is an amazing question from Ashley. She's wondering if you've incorporated beer into any sweet recipes.
Ooh, I haven't challenged myself like that yet, but that is a fun challenge. And if you have any ideas in your head, Ashley, please share them. No, I haven't. I had a thought when kind of developing the recipe. I was like, maybe I'll do like a soda bread or a riff of a soda bread, but that's also still pretty savory. I'm not sure what a sweet dish with an IPA would look like. But
yeah, an IPA might be tough with a sweet dish. Maybe like I'm thinking maybe something fruitier on the more fruity side. But if we're looking to go with more like chocolate flavors, then probably like a stout, some type of imperial stout or dark porter would work a little bit better for like cookies or brownies or something like that. But
chocolate cake with stout sounds amazing. Next year we're back with a cake.
Yeah, I was about to ask if anyone out there has made any kind of dessert recipe with beer before, and now I'm getting a few comments here. We have Rick, he's made a chocolate stout chess pie, which is great. Oh, now everyone's posting. Our own John Paradiso, he's the managing editor of Hop Culture. He made a salted lime goza pound cake. Wow.
I love a pound cake, so we're gonna have to start a recipe exchange.
Yeah. Oh, and one more. We have one. They're coming in now. They're all coming in. A lava cake using an imperial stout. Interesting. Love this.
Y'all are fancy.
Oh my God, they just keep coming. Everyone wants to make a dessert recipe now. An IPA float with sherbet.
Ooh, I never thought to use beer float. That makes sense when you say it out loud.
So the possibilities, they're endless. Beer is not just for drinking, but you can use it in your daily cooking life too. So I think that transitions us really well. I would love to hear more or a little bit more about your kind of daily cooking life. So I know we touched a little bit kind of on the work that you're hoping to do in the community or that you have been in the community, but I'm hoping you can give us just a little bit more of a background on yourself. Now that we've cooked with you, I'd love to get to know you a little bit better and tell us more about what you hope to do in the food community and some of the projects that you may be working on.
Yeah, a little bit about me. I'm like, how far do I go in my food history? I've been cooking since I was like 4 years old, and I've been obsessed with food my entire life. But professionally, I've been cooking for about 4 years now. I used to work on a food truck for a year, a Vietnamese style food truck. I was then a line cook. I've worked as a line cook at a few places. I've worked as a baker, a cheesemonger, a prep cook. Pretty much the ins and outs and all abouts in the food industry. And right now, with the pandemic, I'm mostly at home doing a lot of recipe development similar to this. And that's the work I'm transitioning more into because I can do it from the safety of my own home. I'm also working on doing more food writing and getting more pieces published in some of my favorite food magazines. More to come on that. And currently, I've also been doing some really important work, not only with Queer Food Foundation in creating more queer food spaces, but I've been doing some volunteer shifts with Black Chef Movement, which is another organization that specifically brings free food to different actions around New York City in the different boroughs. So they're on Instagram as well at Black Chef Movement. They're usually looking for people to help table and help volunteer. And their premise is just to literally feed the movement and keep people fed and energized as they're going to actions and to protests. But personally, mostly just doing a lot of private cooking, a lot of recipe development, compiling things to hopefully put out a cookbook at one point someday in the future. It's a very ambitious goal, but I'm starting to compile all of these kind of memory recipes and nostalgic recipes from childhood that I'm trying to call my mom and get on the phone with my aunt and being like, yeah, that one cake that you made at my graduation party, what was in that?
Yeah.
So that's a lot of the work that I've been doing personally, and just mostly doing a lot of reading and reading a lot of cookbooks and a lot of food magazines and just trying to garner inspiration, because that's a thing that can be really hard to find at a time like this, motivation and inspiration. Well,
it's amazing to hear that you're putting together a cookbook. I find that food has this amazing power to not only bring people together, as does beer, but also it really sparks these distinct memories in your mind. And it sounds like you have some of those own food memories. Tell us a little bit more about some of your what are two of your favorite food memories that you really inspired you to get into cooking?
Yeah, two of my favorite food memories. I mean, what really inspired me off the bat to like be so fascinated in food was watching Iron Chef as a little toddler, specifically like Japanese Iron Chef with the like hilarious dubs.
Yeah.
That looks like a really terrible kung fu movie, and there's the fire and the knives, and I was so wide-eyed in wonder. But my mom would cook a lot, and one of my most distinct food memories, my mom is from Michigan, but her family is Southern, and my dad was from Congo. And when my sisters graduated from high school, both sides of the family kind of encroached on the house. And so we were eating like barbecue ribs with Congolese style fufu and greens. And it was like such a weird cultural mishmash, but was like really delicious and like so peculiar. And I loved everything about like the juxtaposition of the two. And that's one of my favorite things. Another thing is I used to stress bake a lot in high school. And I was stress baking at the peak of the cake pop hype. So when I was like not at theater rehearsal or like writing an essay, I would like stress bake dozens of cake pops and then just show up at school and be like, who wants a cake pop? And that's how I made friends. For quite some time, was showing up to school with cake pops that I had stress baked and being like, does anybody want one? Not much has changed. I still bribe all of my friends with food. But yeah, those are two of my most kind of cherished food memories off the top of my head.
Yeah, and that's interesting, that example that you gave about how your families came together when you graduated, and this was kind of like a mashup of food. My wife is actually Korean, and for Thanksgiving, you know, their holiday, they have the traditional like American turkey and accoutrements and cranberry sauce and all that, but they also serve, you know, kimchi, and there's some sushi in there, and it's just like such this amazing. It's her favorite holiday to go home for because she gets just this like amazing buffet of all these different kind of, you know, cultural foods or whatnot.
The thing that I definitely love the most about food and what drives me with it is there's no easier way to like learn about people or a culture that you know virtually nothing about than to just sit down and have a plate of food made by them. And I've always seen food as just this amazing conduit for sharing culture, which is something that's really important at a time like this when there's so many different divides. And it may be hard to like bring people together and have a meal, but I still think that's something that's like important for everyone to just like think about.
Yeah, and food has that power to bring everyone together, and as you were kind of hinting to, also to feed a movement. How have you seen, or what are the ways that you've seen that food has sparked change in different communities, or just been a powerful tool for people to enact change in their own communities?
Yeah, one of the most beautiful things that I've seen since a lot of this like civil unrest that has brewed up in this country since late May has been the rise of community fridges, and fridges that are outdoors in different neighborhoods just for anyone to take or leave food as they need. And that's a really beautiful thing just because we live in a country where 40% of the food that is produced gets thrown away. Nearly half of the food that is grown in the US gets just tossed right into the garbage, either because it's ugly, because it goes bad, because it doesn't sell. And that's really sad to think about when there are so many people in this country who are starving, and specifically children in this country who don't have enough to eat. And so the rise of community fridges has been something that I've really loved to see because people can truly in their communities just go and take what they need without any sort of judgment, without having to wait in like a long soup kitchen line, without having to go through a whole process of getting approved for WIC or for EBT. And it's really been lovely to see how communities can coalesce and can answer and solve the needs of their community without necessarily having to go through governmental red tape, so on and so forth, but just by having good people with good hearts put their minds together and find a way to just solve community issues. So it's been really lovely to see.
That's interesting. I haven't heard of that term, community fridges, before. I'm out in Oakland, California, and we have a lot of like community gardens, so spaces that people just, you know, they grow food, they grow herbs, that kind of thing, and there's one like a couple blocks away from me. If there's anyone that just needs to like take food. They're just like welcome to. But community fridges, that's not something that I've heard before. So I'm wondering if people out there are looking to get more engaged in their own community and looking for ways to help. What are some resources or what are some ways that they can become involved themselves?
Yeah, so Black Chef Movement is definitely a great resource if you are New York based. I know that there's a big community fridge movement in Los Angeles as well. On Instagram, I believe LA Community Fridge is the handle. In New York, there are also a few other groups like Queer Kitchen Brigade, spelled CUIR, which is run by Afro-Latinx people. And they are specifically an organization that is all about seed saving and farming sovereignty. So they help distribute seeds and help people start small urban farms as well. And there was another one that was just at the top of my head, but it has completely flown out. But yeah, there are a lot of grassroots food organizations. Food Not Bombs is another one that has chapters in a lot of different cities as well. You can look and see if your city has a chapter of Food Not Bombs. And that's another organization that's really dedicated to food justice and just making sure that everyone who needs food, which is everyone, has access to food that is healthy and sustainable. So those are definitely some organizations worth looking into to see how you can get involved. But literally just typing in food justice in your city and sending it onto Google should turn up some sort of result.
Yeah, it's kind of going back to what you said about how I think you said 40%, we waste 40% of the food that goes into whether our cooking or grocery stores or things like that. I read a similar statistic once that you can fill up the Empire State Building like 50 times with the amount of food that we waste in a given year. And if we could only redirect that food to, people that really need it and that are starving in our communities, I mean, just imagine the power of being able to do that. So definitely encourage everyone.
What a world we'd live in if everyone had, enough food to eat.
Yeah, I definitely hear you there. So definitely encourage everyone to check out some of the organizations that Chef Chala mentioned. Maybe there's a way that we can add those into or onto the virtual cooking class page, or if anyone's looking for kind of more questions or has more questions about getting involved in food justice, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yes, I'm on Instagram. It should be there in my little name thing at chala.gram. Just shoot me a DM. I love talking about food justice. I'm a big food nerd, so I will gladly talk about it until the day is spent.
I love it. Well, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to wrap things up here. But I just wanted to say thank you again to New Belgium and the Queer Food Foundation, and of course Chef Chala for helping us put on this amazing cooking class. That not only were you guys able to see a great recipe in action, but we also had the chance to delve a little bit deeper, a little bit more under the surface, and talk about how food and beer can really bring communities together and hopefully enact change. So if you're interested or want to follow up, please check out Chef Chala at chala.gram. Drop them a DM and ask, what are some ways that you can get involved in your own communities. Chef Chala, is there anything else that you wanted to add or say before we say goodbye to everyone for the evening?
Just wanted to say another thank you to everyone for tuning in, to Grace, to Hop Culture, to Beers Without Beards, and to Gabrielle at Queer Food Foundation as well. None of the work that we do would be possible without the community around us, and specifically our queer community. So just wanted to say thank you to everyone. And I hope you enjoy your mac and cheese. Honestly, DM me and let me know how you enjoy it. I love getting feedback. If you think it's too salty, I still love getting feedback. Send it my way. My ego won't be hurt.
Perfect. Well, we'll let everyone finish up their mac and cheese, or maybe they finished it while we were chatting. I'm going to finish my Voodoo Ranger IPA, and we'll sign off for the night. Hopefully a few of you will be joining us tomorrow. We have a full day of activities plans, about 7 or 8 different events, from beer and yoga in the morning to get us started, to beer cocktail class, to Women in Beer Leadership Roundtable, sponsored by Chart. So there's some really fun stuff coming up tomorrow. You can still sign up for tickets, www.hopculture.com. /BWOB20, or check us out at Hop Culture Meg. And we'll hopefully see everyone tomorrow.